If you want to know what a paralegal is and what a paralegal does on a day-to-day basis, this is the video you want to watch. I'm Michael Coker. I'm a local personal injury lawyer in Georgia, and I'm going to talk about why you might want to consider becoming a paralegal. Paralegals are in extreme high demand right now. There's really not enough good paralegals out there to supply all the law firms that need help. And so if you're looking for a career that's engaging or that's interesting, you might want to consider being a paralegal. But what is a paralegal? Many people don't understand what a paralegal is or what a paralegal even does. A paralegal, the best way to describe it is that a paralegal is very similar to a nurse and a doctor relationship. Just like how you might go into a doctor's office and the first person you might see might be a nurse, they might take your vitals, they might ask you a bunch of questions, and then ultimately they'll relay that information over to a doctor, and the doctor will then come in and see you. That's what a really good paralegal is like with a legal case. So the first person you might talk to, might meet with, might provide information to would be a paralegal who is able to gather that information, put it in the proper format, and then submit it over to the attorney so that when you meet with the attorney, you know exactly the attorney's prepared and ready to meet with you. And so let me take you through kind of what a paralegal does. And the type of paralegal is going to depend on the type of law firm that you have. But I'm going to speak mostly from a litigation standpoint. So my law firm is a litigation law firm. We do mostly cases where we go to court, file a lawsuit. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a litigation paralegal, what they do. But just know there's different types of paralegals. You could have a real estate paralegal, for example, that might draft real estate documents. Or you might have a paralegal at a, corporate law firm that's helping to draft contracts. But when it comes to litigation, a paralegal's role is very specific. The first thing that a paralegal does is they remain the primary contact, typically between the client and the law firm. So most of the communication comes through the paralegal. Most of the phone calls that you'll receive getting updates or information comes from that paralegal. Now, that's not to say you're never going to speak to an attorney. In my firm, I speak to every client, so I at least meet every client once, get to know them. But the individual who speaks with the clients the most is probably the paralegal. And so that's their first role, is that they are to gather and collect important information about the case, about things that might develop, and relay that information over to the attorney. The second thing that a litigation paralegal might do is draft lawsuit documents. So when you file a lawsuit, there's various documents that have to be drafted. The first is called a complaint. And a complaint is basically the statement that the plaintiff files, which states exactly why they're filing a lawsuit, why the lawsuit's justified, and what they're entitled to receive. The paralegal is generally the one who drafts this complaint for the attorney to review. And so the paralegal will take the information that was gathered, will put it in the proper form for the state or the court that you're in, and then we'll submit it over to the attorney to review. Once that attorney signs off on it, it's typically also the paralegal that files that complaint. So that goes either to the courthouse or electronically files the documents that need to be filed with the court. A paralegal, when a lawsuit's getting prepared, also drafts other documents. Things like summons sometimes are necessary. Things like discovery requests. Sometimes there's questions that you want to ask of the other party. Paralegal will help draft those discovery requests, send them to the other attorney or the other party, and then we'll ultimately get the answers back. And a really good paralegal will then take those answers that we receive back to our questions, and again, we'll go through the documents, we'll go through the answers, and we'll provide an update to the attorney of some important information that might be in there. They also are responsible for communicating with the client and answering discovery. So just like how we sent questions to the other party or the other attorney, they'll likely send questions back to us. And so we will have to answer those questions. And so that paralegal will often coordinate with the attorney and the client, and will basically make sure those answers are sufficient, put them in the proper form, and then have the attorney review before they're submitted. So That is the typical process of what a paralegal does during the workup of a lawsuit. But what about when a case is ready to move forward? Well, one of the things that a paralegal does is they often help to schedule, facilitate, and even review transcripts of depositions. Now, a deposition is basically a question and answer session between a party or a witness and then the attorneys. It's really the one opportunity for the attorney of the other side to ask questions of, for example, our client or other witnesses, and then we get the same opportunity to ask questions of their client or other witnesses. The paralegal is instrumental in this process because they make sure everyone's schedule's coordinated, they make sure that the depositions are scheduled properly, and then when we receive the written transcripts of the deposition, their responsibility is to go through those and again issue a report and pull out important information in those depositions which could benefit everybody in the case. So that's the next phase, is the deposition phase. When a case is ready to go to trial, that's when a paralegal really earns his or her keep at the law firm, because there's a lot to do. There's a lot of documents to prepare and print to be ready to submit to the court and to the jury. There's witnesses that need to be coordinated, people who you need to call, set up a time, tell them when they need to be at the courthouse to testify. They need to continue to help with any other filings that might be necessary, things like a pretrial order or other documents that need to be prepared prior to the trial. And then there's other administrative things that need to be done, things like making sure that the easels are packed with any trial boards that might be needed, or make sure that the laptop computer has a hookup that can connect to the court's technology software. So again, at a trial is when a paralegal really becomes the right-hand man or woman of that attorney and really make sure that the case is ready for trial. Now, a really good paralegal is really hard to find. And these days, it seems like less and less individuals, men and women, are going into the paralegal space. And so if you're someone who litigation is exciting, or working in a law firm is exciting, and helping people through their legal issues, you might want to consider being a paralegal, because it's much easier than having to go to law school for 3 years, pass the bar, work your way up, and then ultimately practice law. This gives you the opportunity to work with the attorney to accomplish the same goals with much less schooling and much less expense. Not as many student loans you're taking out, not as much of a commitment to be a full lawyer. To be a paralegal, though, you need to make sure you find a good law firm with a good lawyer to work with, because having a good or a bad lawyer can make a paralegal's job easy or extremely difficult. If you have a lawyer, for example, who's not reviewing your documents on time or following up on deadlines, it's going to make your job that much more stressful. So you want to make sure you work, if you're a paralegal, you work for an attorney that's organized, that understands the law and understands the process, and is able to give you coaching of how to better your career, to gain more knowledge, or to even go to seminars and learn more about the law. And so these are all aspects of things that you need to consider if you're thinking about becoming a paralegal. Now, here's a couple pitfalls if you're a paralegal that you want to make sure you don't fall into. One, you do not have a license to practice law. And so you want to make sure that you're not providing legal advice to any individual. That's the responsibility of the attorney alone. And so you can help, you can provide documents, you can help give guidance, but if there's a legal question that needs legal advice, that has to be done by the attorney. The second thing you need to be careful of if you're a paralegal is that there are certain things that can only be done by a lawyer, such as signing pleadings, representing an individual. And so I see it all the time where some of these not so great law firms really have their paralegals do all the work in the case. And when you look at it objectively, the paralegal is really the one representing the client, not the attorney. And so you want to make sure that it's a very symbiotic relationship between paralegal and attorney, and that they're working together, they're doing things together, but it's ultimately the attorney who's responsible for the representation. If you ever work for an attorney as a paralegal that basically makes you do everything and plays golf all day or never comes to the office, you need to run the other way, because that's a very big concern if the attorney is just letting their paralegals run their cases, run their office, and ultimately practice law. That's illegal, and you definitely don't want to be a part of it. The other thing you want to be careful if you're a paralegal, the third thing, is you want to avoid lawyers who use you to basically get cases, especially if they use you to get cases in ways that are not always appropriate. In most states, solicitation or of an attorney is legal, but only to a certain amount, or there's certain requirements that have to be done. So if you have an attorney that's expecting you to go out and bring in cases and ask you to do things that you don't feel comfortable with, or we call them in our business to be a runner, meaning to try to, go to accident scenes or get someone at the police department to send you cases or do those kind of items, that's completely illegal here in Georgia, and it's illegal in most states. And so if your attorney is asking you to blur the lines on what's ethical and what's not, as far as how to get cases, that's absolutely something that you need to be concerned about and you need to watch out for. And so I always recommend you, as the paralegal, do your research on your attorney. Make sure it's somebody who's respectful, who's ethical, and who runs a good customer-based practice. Read the attorney's reviews if you're looking for a job. See what the culture of that office is, because, again, whether or not you have a good or a bad experience as a paralegal is going to depend a lot on the attorney that you work for. So that's a little bit of a rundown of what a paralegal is, why you might consider being a paralegal, and things that you need to watch out for if you do become a paralegal. If you have any other questions, or you'd like to know more about what it is to be a paralegal, or maybe you're a paralegal now and you have a personal injury case in Georgia that you want to talk to us about, feel free to give us a call. I appreciate you for sitting here, for listening, for learning more about the practice of law and becoming a paralegal. And so if I can help you in any way, I'm more than happy to do so. All right, until next time, thanks for watching.